Hello again, Chris Lee and Chase Robinson of Southeastern 16 here to talk Kentucky football and particularly Mark Stoops. The season has started to go south in Lexington. Of course, we know Mark Stoops was almost the A&M coach a year ago, which made it a little tricky coming into the season. And when you miss expectations, you've got a boiling cauldron of stuff you want to have to deal with. We're going to have a conversation about Mark Stoops, about whether he is the right fit at Kentucky, what all that looks like. And it will be a conversation. I think we will unpack every side of this. If you're looking for hot takes and stuff like that that's manufactured, we're not your guys. We try to do it intelligently. And I think this is a discussion that's interesting because on one hand, you can see what Kentucky fans are frustrated with. You can add to that the fact that he almost left a year ago. But when you look into the historical background, it begs some questions about how much better can you do. Now, I'm not saying Kentucky can't do better or shouldn't try to do better. Maybe. I don't know where this is going to go, but let's talk about the recent history. Look, I called Kentucky my sleeper team coming into the season. I thought Kentucky's defense was outstanding. I thought the offense, just by virtue of the receiving core it had, was going to be fine. So I'm surprised to see Kentucky struggling the way it is. And I do get when your offense puts people to sleep and then your defense has a kind of game that I had Saturday where Jarquez Hunter had 272 yards rushing against, NFL players in your front seven. I get how people would be upset. I mean, undeniably, I think the thing that everybody can agree on is at the moment, it's not going as well as it should, Chase.
You're right, and they had such that big win against Ole Miss. They played so good against Georgia. They got the win over Ole Miss. You thought, hey, maybe this team is kind of what we thought they would be. But then you look after the Ole Miss win, they had a bye week, and then after that bye week, a loss to Vanderbilt at home, a loss to Florida on the road, and then back at home, and you lose to Auburn this past Saturday. So after that big win, when he thought, hey, things may be shifting in Kentucky's way, we may be seeing kind of the potential of Kentucky, they go into a bye week and then drop three straight. And so, and we've talked about it. There's big issues offensively. There's just they haven't been on the same page, it looks like. And so, 0-3 after a bye week and after a big win, that's not at all, I think, what we expected from Kentucky from what we saw when they beat Ole Miss.
They've also got this weird thing going where they can't win at home, right? You had a disaster of a performance against South Carolina. Then you come back and you lose to Georgia it's only by a point. You cream Ohio, which you should have done. And then they beat Ole Miss on the road. And you're thinking, man, it is just set up. They're favored against Vanderbilt by a dozen points. They lose that one. They go to Florida. That was a disaster. They come home with a get-right opportunity against Auburn. They blow that one too. I don't know if they just press playing at Kroger Field or what the deal is, but that's a whole weird dynamic too. And that is a fan base that's loyal, Chase. I mean, they travel a little bit. When you give Kentucky something to be happy about, the fan base shows up, and that just adds to the weird dynamic of Lexington has been a little house of horrors for Mark Stoops in Kentucky lately.
Yeah, they've lost their last 7 straight SEC home games, and that's not good either when you've got fans paying a lot of money to be season ticket holders or come to these SEC games and you can't win there at Kroger Field. So, that's something that Kentucky has against them right now as well. And so, I feel like Kentucky's just in a tough spot, and I'm not pointing fingers or blaming anyone. It's just kind of how the season's gone. It's not at all what we thought they would or really what they have the potential to be. I'm not sure what the problem is, but there's an issue because these are not things you want to be reading off, especially when you think about the hype and the roster and when you look at this team on paper.
Well, I will tell you what I think the issue is. I'm not sure where the blame lies for this, but of course, everybody knows Mark Stoops is a defensive-oriented coach. He started building that program a decade ago on defense. They got young defensive talent. They let it develop. And once it did, years 4 and 5, they go 7-6, and then they go 10-3 in year 6, which, of course, 2018 was the 10-3 season. that might as well have been 100 years ago, because since then you've seen the explosion of the portal and the NIL, and it's changed everything. But even with that, Stoops has been consistent. They went 10-3 in 2021, winning seasons each of the last 2 years. But I have seen the issue lately is offense. They've changed coordinators just about every year. They've changed quarterbacks just about every year. They had Will Levis, who, say what you want about Will Levis, and I am a Titans fan, so I see it a lot, but Levis was good enough to be in the conversation as a first-round quarterback before the Titans took him second round, and he became a starter in the NFL as a second-year guy, which points to talent. That year they could not protect him. I think he played banged up. They get a quarterback out of the portal last year. That never went well. He never looked comfortable. And Brock Vandagriff has probably been worse than either of them the last 2 years. So I don't know if there is some sort of a conflict, and this is just me talking out loud, not with any information, but you do wonder when a team is run by a defensive-minded coach, it's not going well, the personnel change every year between quarterback and coordinator, and it doesn't go well several years in a row, it does beg some questions.
Yeah. No, I agree. And they've got to find something offensively because that is a big issue with this team. And in this day and age in college football, you got to be able to score. And they need to be able to recruit at a high level. They need to put top level players on the field in the SEC week in and week out. And so, there are some corrections that need to be made as far as the offense goes and how they move forward from here. Because I think that where they're at right now is going towards the bottom. And so there's a lot of room to go up. They just got to find what they need to make sure this program does go up.
I will bring up one other thing that I think is causing some issues on offense that is beyond their control. I'll get to that in just a minute. First of all, reminder, BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting. Every stat, matchup breakdown, even live odds and spreads to bet on during games, with the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs, NHL, NBA to political props. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or poker, unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Okay, Chase, if you go back to 2020, John Schlarman, their offensive line coach, passed away at 45 from cancer. I think he even tried to coach through some of that. Just an awful, awful thing to have happen to a football team. But Kentucky also had an identity. We heard the talk Big Blue Wall over and over and over again. And that was where Kentucky got it done. It feels like Kentucky's had a pretty decent history of running backs. And I feel like the next year they did win 10 games, but you do wonder, part of that identity they played to just hasn't showed up. Now, Ray Davis last year got some stuff done, in the rushing game, but then you had to offset that by the fact you couldn't throw the ball very well. That was probably part of it. It was a lot of what Mark Stoops probably wanted to do. He had the guy to run it. Maybe they haven't been able to dial into that as much, but I think something offensively is not working between all the changes year to year. They've got to find something in somebody that they can trust and stick with, because I do trust Mark Stoops to turn it around because of the way he coaches defense. To me, I just have a lot of questions about what's going on there.
Yeah, and when you are constantly having to change, there is going to be, you're not going to be in sync. And so if they can, find a guy, stick with a guy, not have and even when it comes to quarterbacks, not having a different quarterback every year to have to work in the system and things like that. I mean, I think that could go a long way for Kentucky. But the inconsistencies offensively because of all the change, I think that could be a big issue with what we're seeing with Wildcats.
Programs against themselves, right? Now, it is a little different now with the portal and with NIL, and I'm going to get to that in a minute because I think that's got to be part of the conversation too. Mark Stoops has had 7 winning seasons in 12 or 13 years in Kentucky. If you count back before him, Chase, to go back, how many winning seasons did they have before him? They had 7 winning seasons from 1984 till when he took over
Wow.
in, what was it, 2013. So you had basically as many winning seasons during Stoops' tenure as you had the whole, 30 years before that. To me,
Yeah.
and look, this is always a tricky conversation, right? Because there's nothing that says a program has got to stay where it is. And you always
Right.
like it feels like you're insulting the Kentucky fan base if you say, hey, you can't do any better, right? And I don't want to do that. You always try to look like if you'd looked at Kentucky baseball and said, hey, they're in the SEC, they're just never going to get done against all this competition. Just stick with whoever they got as a coach and ride with it. If you'd done that and thought that way, they never get Nick Mingione. Look what that guy's done. So I'm not going to rule that out as a possibility. But I am saying you look at history, Mark Stoops has had about as much success in his dozen years as everybody had in about 30 combined before him. And I do think that counts for something.
Oh yeah, I mean, it certainly does. What he's done at Kentucky is tremendous. Like he's gotten them to where they have been consistently winning and winning important games and being in good bowl games. Like he has brought some really good things to Kentucky football, and you can't look past that to me. Like, people want to look past that and just look at the right here, right now, but yeah, I think what he's done at Kentucky is tremendous, and I don't think anybody else at this point could have done what he's done at Kentucky in the last 10 years.
Now, if you want to argue counterpoints, it wasn't that long ago before he got there that Rich Brooks had done a good job. Brooks went his last 4 years 8-5, 8-5, 7-6, 7-6, and so there was a little bit of success right before Stoops. But then they went to Joker Phillips when it went 6-7, 5-7, 2-10. So I don't know that Stoops really got the benefit of much of that, other than being able to say, hey, look, to recruits when he got there. It hadn't been that long ago. We were winning football games. So take that into the evidence. I don't know what statement that does or doesn't make, but here is the other issue with them. And I'm going to be very interested to see where this goes. Okay. Money is always a factor in this chase. They're going to have to pay, if you have to pay full freight, $40-something million to get rid of Mark Stoops. I'm not certain based on the stuff that we brought up. And again, I'm not there. I don't see all the up close issues. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. If you're there in Lexington, it may be an open and closed case that you get rid of Mark Stoops. But I'm not certain as I sit here talking through it and seeing what he's done and how many games he's won and what was done before him that I get rid of Mark Stoops, even if it costs me nothing. Throwing $44 million. And again, I got some more financial things to unpack after that. But I think, is that fair?
I mean, I think a lot of this, and yes, look, if you watch football, you can see there's clear issues with this team. But that's going to happen. Like,
Yeah.
But he's been so consistent is my thing. And these keyboard warriors out here making him seem like the worst coach in the world just because they're not having a good season this year. That's the problem with a lot of people, with a lot of teams. Like these people who are just spend all their time finding the negative and bashing a coach. When they're just looking at the last 7 games. But I think when you look at the history of what he's done, I think that could help him. But I think you also can look at, I'm not the basketball guy, but you saw Coach Cal there at Kentucky. I think he saw that, hey, maybe my time here is done, and it was, and he left. Like he saw, hey, they're not happy with me. Things aren't going great right now. Let's move on. I don't know if there'll be a situation like that, but I think that's smart for a coach to look at, say,
Sure.
hey, where do I have the program right now? Even if they're not going to fire the said coach, where do I have the program right now? Am I doing things to benefit it, or is my time here done and let me go find somewhere else to go? That's always something I think to take in consideration as well, especially at a school like Kentucky when you've already seen a coach in very recent history do that.
Well, I'll give you a similarity. Speaking of basketball, Kevin Stallings at Vanderbilt. It didn't really go super well his last few years. They'd kind of declined to being from a team that was, top 3 or 4 of the conference. No, granted, the SEC wasn't as good at the time as it is now, but Kevin Stallings had Vanderbilt winning consistently and ranked in the top 25 a lot. It'd been as well as they'd done in a long time. They got rid of Stallings, hired Bryce Drew, and it's never really gone well for them ever since. Now, again, the program was declining, recruiting was declining. There were a lot of reasons you could have looked at and said, it's time for them to make a change. And I thought that was the right move, but it hadn't gone well. And I think that's on the table for Kentucky, too, potentially. Like, it feels like it's the right move, but, if you don't nail the next hire, you could be back to some 3 and 4 win seasons because the SEC is getting tougher with Texas and Oklahoma. Again, that is not a blanket statement to say, hey, Kentucky, you should absolutely be happy with who you've got. No questions why you're griping about this. Again, and I think maybe if you're closer to the situation than we are, you have a better idea whether that's the right call or not. But without knowing all the information, that is one comp that comes to mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and it's a sticky situation. It always is, with these type conversations. But in the end, there are decisions that have to be made, and there's going to be part of the fan base who loves it, and I'm sure part of the fan base who hates it, whatever the decision's made.
Well, and here's the other thing, okay? Revenue sharing is coming soon, maybe as soon as next year, and I will be interested to see how that gets handed out at different schools. I think you've seen what is it, that 85% of the football revenue should go to football players or whatever. But, if it's up to the schools, right? And you're saying, I'm betting my money, which school in the league, if it's up to them of that $22 million or whatever they've got to hand out, which school do you think is going to throw more of it than anybody towards football in this league, Chase? Not a trick question.
Alabama.
Well, I would say Kentucky.
Oh, well, yeah.
But here's my point. If you've got a limited amount of revenue sharing, the school that is always going to throw it more towards basketball than anybody is probably Kentucky.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know where NIL is going to come into this, if that's going to be a bonus, if that's going to be a way to get money to other places. But I think if we were about to be in a resource war, Kentucky is probably going to put more of its money towards basketball than it is in football because we know where the bread is buttered at Kentucky. Now that it may work out to where you've got a cap from the school and NIL just adds an unlimited amount of money to that. But I'm just saying there's a world where you could see, if you're in a war for financial resources, that football job getting a little bit tougher. If you're Kentucky, if more money goes to basketball. I don't know how it's going to play out. I'm just going to throw that out there as another factor, though, because then you're looking at bringing another guy in on top of paying Stoops to go away. Now, if he gets a job somewhere else and somebody's sharing the buyout, then that's something too. But I think we've got more questions than answers about the future of how college athletics is going to be underwritten, and that's just another little. Well, it's not a little piece; it's a big piece, and maybe how good or not attractive the football job is to anybody going forward.
Yeah, and it's a tough spot, and this is a tough time to be coaching. I feel like in the SEC because it is such a good conference. Recruiting is tough, so it's not an easy job. People like to again point fingers and try to dismiss someone, but this is a tough job that they're dealing with, and it's going to be tough to win regardless of where you are.
Well, and I do think this too, though, Chase. I think the SEC's ascension in football, the addition of Oklahoma and Texas, the conference has just gotten stronger.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody at its base has got a better job to offer, even Vanderbilt, just by virtue of being in the SEC. You're lost in football for a long time, but hey, you're in the SEC, which gets stronger by the day. So you're also the most northernmost school, I think, in the SEC, which probably helps you in Ohio and places they've recruited. I think this is still a respectable job, whatever they do. I just question, under the circumstances, is moving on from Mark Stoops the right move? I just feel like he's had a lot of success, and
yeah,
I don't know. I'm not saying moving on might not be the right move, but I think there's just enough questions given what's happened before him and how consistent he's been. I think really hard and long before I moved on from Mark Stoops.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. And I know they are right now, the decision makers, to make sure they do the right thing for this program.
All right. We'll be here to cover Kentucky football the rest of the season. Also got you covered for basketball. Did get to watch, or we'll be watching the Cats very heavily this basketball season under Mark Pope. Think that's going to be fascinating. Hope you subscribe to the channel. We cover football, baseball, basketball year round. Hit that subscribe button, enable your notifications so you know when we have content. And if you're interested in advertising, caroline.smith@southeastern14.com is where those go. For Chase Robinson, I'm Chris Lee. You've been watching Southeastern 16, presented by BetOnline.